about contacts between the Donald Trump campaign, back when it was the campaign, and Russian officials. Sean Spicer had said there's nothing to investigate. The Republican chairman of the House Intel Committee, Devin Nunes, saying there's no evidence that will warrant an investigation, or there's no evidence that there's been contact backed up by this investigation. So let's start. Why don't we do this? Let's start with what we know about what happened and the outstanding questions here.
Well, you know, this is like a one giant word game. Here is what we're hearing. If you listen to the briefing, the press briefing this morning from Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and then the one at the White House by Sean Spicer, and down the one that just concluded with Adam Schiff. So here's what the bottom line here is. There's a lot we don't know, and that's what the FBI, that's what the intelligence community are trying to get to the bottom of. So let's take what Sean Spicer says, which is he was asked whether there should be a special prosecutor. Frankly, it's a lot early to even be asking that question, because the investigations are still ongoing. We don't know. There's a lot of questions that are unanswered. And so Sean very smartly said, well, what is there? What is there to see here? There's nothing to see here. Let's move on. That's pretty much the same question from Devin Nunes, which is he says that there's absolutely nothing he's seen that indicates any contacts that are of concern, and that he thinks that there's no there. Now you hear from Adam Schiff. He says there's still a lot of open questions, and so the investigation should continue before anybody makes any conclusions. And I think that's the most important part of this, Brianna, because here's what we do know at this point. We know, and CNN has reported, that there are contacts that have been found by investigators in the intelligence community. We know that it's being looked at. These are contacts by people who are outside the Trump campaign, but people associated with the Trump campaign, and people who are either Russian nationals, people who are connected to the Kremlin. Some of them are people who are known to U.S. intelligence. Now, we have not reported that there were any Russian intelligence people in touch with the Trump campaign. That is not known. That is very much what the FBI is trying to get to the bottom of. That's what the intelligence community is trying to get to the bottom of. Whether or not anybody inside the Trump campaign knew about these contacts, we don't know. And so there's a lot of parsing of the language that's going on. And I think certainly the White House would just like this to go away. And that's one reason why last week, after the New York Times reported some aspects of this, and CNN did also, that they pressed Devin Nunes, they pressed Senator Burr on the Senate side, and the CIA director, Pompeo, to talk to reporters on background to try to help knock down some of these stories. It didn't really work that well, because in the end, there's a lot of questions that are still unanswered, and they could not answer those questions. And that's one reason why this story is still going to keep haunting them.
And David Chalian, let's listen to how Sean Spicer described what was this orchestrated White House pushback on this concept, where they were trying to enlist some allies in this. Here's what he said during the briefing.
I think there's something strange about, or there's something odd about the White House press secretary getting the CIA director on the phone to knock down a story about an investigation.
No, but see, respectfully, you're using words like knock down. There was a story in a newspaper. Hold on. No. There was reporters coming to us saying there is a story out there. What's your take on it? And our answer was, we don't believe it's accurate. We don't believe it's false. But obviously, that's our take on it. And reporters were saying to us, well, is there anybody that you can point to substantiate this claim? Now, remember, this all started with the FBI coming to us, bringing it to our attention, saying that the story in the Times was not accurate. In fact, it was BS. And all we did was simply say, that's great. Could you tell other reporters the same thing you're telling us? All we sought to do was to actually get an accurate report out. And again, I think Chairman Nunes this morning, over and over again, made it very clear that no evidence that has been brought to his attention suggested that reporting was accurate. So, respectfully, I think it's interesting that I'm being asked what's appropriate when what we're doing is actually urging reporters to engage with subject matter experts who can corroborate whether or not something's accurate or not.
Should there be a special prosecutor? Darrell Ace has called for a special prosecutor to look into this.
Right, and I guess my question would be a special prosecutor for what? You know as well as I do that the intelligence community has looked at it as well. There's a big difference. I think that Russia's involvement in activity has been investigated up and down. So the question becomes at some point, if there's nothing to further investigate, what are you asking people to investigate?
All right, David Chalian, you're listening to that. And also, of course, there are some guidelines that the FBI should not be in discussions at all, no matter which direction this went with the White House. So what's your reaction to Sean Spicer giving that description and saying there's nothing the matter with what we did?
I think a couple things are going on this story today. Pretty important things, Brianna. One, what Sean Spicer basically said there, two different things. One, he says there's nothing to see here. There's absolutely nothing to see here. He certainly hopes that that's how it plays out. That is not something he could definitively say right now because there is not a conclusive investigation into all of this yet. So that may sort of come back to haunt him, that posture. The second thing he's trying to do is sort of just defend himself in the White House from collecting these validators in government to get on the phone with reporters and say, hey, can you help validate our take on this story? I don't think that's as problematic necessarily, Brianna, for Sean Spicer as it is, and you could see the Democrats are now trying to take advantage of this, for some Republicans on the Hill. Look at what Dick Durbin said today, the number 2 in the Senate on the Democratic side, calling for an independent special prosecutor. Look at Chuck Schumer going after Senator Burr today, saying that the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee are putting Senator Burr on notice. And then what we all just watched here with Congressman Adam Schiff, who's saying there's no way, basically, that Chairman Nunes can say that there's no evidence because not everything is in evidence yet, and the investigation is ongoing. So I think you see here sort of a White House saying nothing to see here, and Democrats really trying to ratchet up the heat on Republicans for either an independent or completely bipartisan, thorough investigation, and that it is too soon for anyone to sort of declare where that will lead.
And Gloria Borger, when it comes to the FBI, you heard Adam Schiff there. He was pretty much questioning the impartiality of the FBI. And you even heard a warning over the weekend from New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who was saying to congressional Republicans essentially, be concerned about the perception of whether you are impartial here. Even if you are, the perception of this is very important about whether you weighed in to back up the Trump administration on this before there are conclusions.
Right. And, you know, there is that moment that Sean Spicer described and has been written about with, Reince Priebus after a meeting being pulled aside by the deputy director there of the FBI saying this story is BS. And then Priebus later on asking, well, how can we get that word out? And the question is, of course, was that appropriate? And Adam Schiff believes it was not. Was that appropriate for anyone from the FBI to give a heads up in any way, shape, or form about an investigation that is ongoing, saying, oh, by the way, we think this is garbage. Many times the FBI, and Evan knows more about this than I do, can be asked to sort of give guidance on where investigations stand, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a little different. And not only does Schiff think that the FBI was compromised in some way, shape, or form, but also he believes that the new CIA director, Pompeo, whose name he raised, might be compromised because he was asked by the White House to make these calls saying that there's no there there. And what Schiff is saying is, how do you know there's no there there? We don't know there's no there there. Have you concluded your investigation? So, Schiff is trying to make the point that that these agencies are getting ahead of themselves before the Congress, which does oversight on this, has been even able to start its own investigation. And some of his colleagues, he believes, are just jumping to conclusions to clearly please the White House.
Brianstelter, and this is the case Sean Spicer is making. What is the problem with the White House putting reporters in touch with people who are in the know, who can back up what the White House believes to be true, which is that this story is a nothing burger? Whether or not, of course, we should mention there are outstanding questions when it comes to that reporting. Evan has outlined that. But what's the matter? Sean Spicer saying, look, we're just doing our job as communications professionals, trying to give reporters the truth.
Clearly, he doesn't believe anything inappropriate happened. But the fact that this communication leaked out shows that someone somewhere does think it was inappropriate. Ultimately, as Gloria was describing, in the grand scheme of things, this is about how weak or strong the legislative branch is going to be as a check on the executive branch. We know the legislative branch can be strong when it wants to be, but it does not always choose to be in these situations. So clearly a very big story that we're seeing developments on, even as it's incremental hour by hour on this. And I just think one thing Spicer said does not hold water. He said nothing new has come up on this story front for 6 months. He said, you all keep asking, but there's nothing new that's being reported. It's the same stuff that we've heard over and over again. With all due respect to Mr. Spicer, 6 months ago, we were in the dog days of August. The WikiLeaks stolen emails from Podesta.
Hey, Brian, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Let's listen to House Speaker Paul.